Cold War occurs when major powers have conflicting ideologies or interests but avoid direct confrontation due to the threat of mutual destruction. A state of tension between nations without direct military conflict, often involving propaganda, espionage, proxy wars, and economy. The Cold War, 1947 to 1991, between the United States and the Soviet Union. Colonial War. Driven by the desire to expand territory, control resources, and exert influence over indigenous populations. Conflicts initiated by a powerful nation to establish or maintain control over colonies. The Algerian War of Independence, 1954 to 1962, against French colonial rule. Invasion. Motivated by territorial disputes, expansionist ambitions, or to overthrow a government perceived as hostile or illegitimate. An aggressive entrance into a territory with the intent to conquer, occupy, or overthrow. The 1944, during World War II by Allied forces to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation. Arises from disputes over territory, resources, political power, or ideology. Warfare conducted using conventional weapons and tactics between states or groups. World War I, 1914 to 1918, involved large-scale conventional warfare between major powers. Employed by weaker forces to counteract the conventional military superiority of a larger opponent. Use of guerrilla tactics, insurgency, or other non-traditional methods to fight a stronger adversary. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, where the Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics against U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Total war. Triggered by existential threats or when a nation perceives the need to mobilize its entire society and economy for survival. A war in which a country utilizes all its resources and population for the war effort. World War II, 1939 to 1945, where nations mobilized all resources, including civilian industries, for the war effort. Limited war. Nations engage in conflict with specific, limited goals, such as territorial gains or political concessions, often to avoid the costs or risks of total war. A conflict with restricted objectives, resources, or geographical scope. The Falklands War, 1982, between the United Kingdom and Argentina over the Falkland Islands. Nuclear war. Could occur if a nation decides to use nuclear weapons either as a first strike or in retaliation, typically in situations where leaders perceive no other option to achieve or prevent an existential outcome. Warfare involving the use of nuclear weapons. No full-scale nuclear war has occurred, but the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 by the United States are examples of nuclear warfare. Undeclared war. Governments may engage in conflicts covertly or without formal declarations to avoid legal, political, or diplomatic repercussions. Military actions taken without a formal declaration of war. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, where the U.S. engaged in military actions without a formal declaration of war by Congress. World War. A war involving many of the world's nations, usually on a global scale. Regional conflicts escalate through alliances and geopolitical tensions, drawing in multiple global powers. War II, 1939 to 1945, involving nearly every major world power. Chemical war. Chemical weapons, such as nerve agents or choking gases, are used to target enemy forces or civilian populations. Warfare using chemical agents to cause mass casualties or disrupt the enemy. Use of mustard gas and chlorine gas during World War I, 1914 to 1918. Biological war. Nations or groups may weaponize bacteria, viruses, or other pathogens to cause widespread illness and death. Use of biological toxins or infectious agents as weapons to harm people, animal, and plants. Electronic war. Involves jamming, spoofing, or hacking into electronic systems. Warfare using electronic systems to disrupt enemy communications, radar, and weapons systems. The extensive use of electronic warfare during the Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, to disrupt Iraqi radar and communications. Information war. Governments or groups use propaganda, disinformation, and cyber tactics to influence or disrupt the enemy's information infrastructure. Use of information technology to manipulate, disrupt, or influence public opinion and decision-making. Russian disinformation campaigns and cyber operations in the lead-up to and during the annexation of Crimea, 2014. Guerrilla war. Small, irregular forces use hit-and-run tactics against larger traditional forces. Guerrilla warfare is often employed by resistance movements, insurgents, or smaller nations fighting against occupying or invading forces. The Spanish guerrilla war against Napoleon's forces during the Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814. War of Liberation. Oppressed nations or colonies rise against colonial powers or occupying forces to achieve independence. Conflict aimed at achieving independence from colonial or oppressive rule. The American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, where American colonies fought for independence from British rule. Proxy war. Powerful nations back different sides in a conflict in another country, using it as a battleground to achieve strategic objectives. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, where the US and Soviet Union supported opposing sides. Civil war. A war between groups within the same country. Internal divisions over political, ethnic, religious, or economic issues lead to a breakdown in order and the rise of competing factions. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, between the northern and southern states of the U.S. Economic war. A conflict where economic measures like sanctions, trade restrictions, and embargoes are used to weaken an opponent. Economic war. Nations use economic tools to disrupt or damage the economy of an adversary. Religious war. A conflict driven by religious differences or the desire to impose religious beliefs. Religious divisions or zeal can lead to wars aimed at conversion, suppression of heresy, or control of holy sites. The Crusades, 1096 to 1291, a series of religious wars between Christians and Muslims over control of the Holy Land.